I'm Grant Oster. While pursuing my MC degree in chemistry in graduate school, I crossed paths with Laura. I fell in love instantly. It took her about 6 months, just before earning her MA in art history, to reciprocate, but it happened. Although neither of us was particularly experienced, as far as I was concerned, our bed life was excellent, and she never voiced any complaints. We married less than a year after her MA graduation, securing jobs in the same city. She taught at a community college, while I taught part-time at a state university and worked part-time with a science consulting firm. After 3 years of marriage, I left the university and worked full-time as a consultant, specializing in explosives. One of my clients was the federal government, and during the birth of our first daughter, Angela, my government work involved extensive travel. I understand it was tough on Laura, but I did propose quitting for a full-time teaching job at a local college which had tried to recruit me multiple times. However, Laura appreciated my job's financial benefits and the lifestyle it afforded us, encouraging me to persist. Her smiling mantra was, "I can survive, I'm self-sufficient." Even with the birth of our second daughter, Grace, 2 years after Angela, my travel persisted. I again suggested a career change, but Laura insisted I stick with consulting, considering the additional responsibilities of raising 2 children. When our daughters turned 5 and 7, my schedule eased, leading Laura to return to work. She secured an administrative position at the local university, primarily affiliated with the liberal arts college. For reasons I never fully understood but didn't bother me as it brought her joy, Laura developed a keen interest in photography. We now have over a dozen albums chronicling our lives with the kids. Update. During that time, Laura developed an unexpected interest in other languages, particularly Italian. She occasionally traveled for her job, notably to Chicago, where she attended meetings with benefactors, visiting professors, and the Art Institute. Additionally, she visited Gina, a college friend who had been an Italian exchange student and was now working in Chicago. When our children were 8 and 10, global terrorist activities made my skill set highly valuable to the federal government. I was recruited to work full-time for a 2-year period involving extensive travel. Before accepting the assignment, I discussed it with Laura at length, as it would require more travel for that period, possibly longer, with occasional absences lasting more than a month. Laura encouraged me to accept, expressing that she and the girls would miss me but would manage fine. Unfortunately, my government assignment meant I was away for 2 consecutive Christmases, when Grace was 9 and 10 and Angela 11 and 12, which was heart-wrenching. Laura took the girls to visit Gina in Chicago during this time. I maintained daily phone contact with them throughout their week-long visit, and they appeared content. Gina's relatives, including kids around our daughters' ages, were also present. Shortly before Thanksgiving, after over 2 years providing expertise to combat terrorism, I returned to full-time consulting with minimal travel. Laura continued occasional travel, usually about once a month for 2 or 3 days, mostly to Chicago. I gladly assumed all parental duties for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they accompanied her. It's expected that girls may grow closer to their mother, and although I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they rarely confided in me or sought my opinion on personal matters, contrary to their openness with Laura. It didn't bother me much, except for one thing. They never shared their experiences, or were as talkative about their trips with their mother to Chicago. While not withdrawn, they never voluntarily provided information and often playfully changed the subject. Just before 18-year-old Grace went to an out-of-state college and Angela was a junior at another out-of-state college, Laura experienced a dark period. Upon discovering her tears on multiple occasions, I inquired about the cause. She attributed it to becoming an empty nester and suggested a shopping trip to Chicago with the girls. The trip was hastily planned and apparently required several long phone conversations with Gina, in Italian. Since I didn't understand Italian, I accepted Laura's account of the details without doubt, despite her being unusually emotional in the days leading up to their departure. Laura returned from Chicago after an additional 3 days, showing a more positive outlook, though not entirely back to normal. However, what truly surprised me was the limited number of purchases they brought back from their shopping trip. Upon inquiry, I learned that some items would be shipped later, including those sent directly to the girls' college addresses. I did observe a positive change in my bed life, which was never problematic, except during my prolonged absences when I remained faithful to Laura. The improvement coincided with Grace leaving for school. I attributed this positive shift to Laura and me growing closer as empty nesters, relishing the heightened lovemaking. Then, the pivotal event in my story unfolded. Update. I took an unplanned break from work around noon on a Thursday without informing Laura, who was at her usual workplace. Originally intending to play 9 holes of golf, my plans were thwarted by rain. Nevertheless, I was preparing for our upcoming anniversary and wanted to surprise Laura with a party. To execute this plan, I consulted with an event planner. Around 3 p.m., a delivery man arrived with a wooden crate marked fragile. Using a dolly, he brought it up the 4 front stairs to our house. The crate was addressed to Laura, and after signing for it, we positioned it in the living room with the "This Side Up" label properly displayed. The delivery of the crate struck me as unusual, and I couldn't fathom its contents. Examining the return address, which read Romano Photography Studios, along with an address in Chicago's Center City, I called Laura at work to inform her about the delivery. Initially quiet, she mentioned it was work-related and supposed to be sent to her office, with a plan to have someone assist in bringing it to the office the next day. While this explanation seemed rational, 3 factors raised suspicions. 1. The prolonged silence on the phone, unusual for the talkative Laura. 2. Her commanding tone when instructing not to open it, coupled with a stressed voice. And 3. Her overall uptight demeanor. Intrigued, I took photos of the crate and entered the return address information into my laptop. Upon Laura's return from work, she hurriedly inspected the crate, appearing suspicious of tampering. When I asked about its contents, she became vague and standoffish. Sensing something amiss, I offered to help open it, not only to be helpful, but also to gauge her reaction. However, she insisted on inspecting it at work for potential damage and a possible insurance claim. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 maintenance personnel from her college carefully moved the crate to a school van under Laura's supervision. When I shared my enthusiasm about the school exhibition, I was really trying to gauge Laura's response. She avoided eye contact and hesitated, mentioning uncertainly that she wasn't sure if that was the purpose, but assured me that she would let me know if they decided on an exhibition. The fact that she stuttered twice within 14 hours discussing the same topic, something unusual for the usually eloquent Laura, only fueled my curiosity even more. If that didn't pique my interest, I wasn't sure what would. The 5th aspect that unsettled me and raised suspicions was Laura's subsequent silence about the mysterious crate. Over the following 2 weeks, since the arrival of the enigmatic package, I gathered most publicly available information about Romano Photography Studios. This entity served as the U.S. business front for the globally renowned photographer Piero Romano, someone I might have vaguely heard of previously. Surprisingly, Laura, despite frequently discussing artists and photographers in connection with her photography hobby and university work, had never mentioned him. Piero Romano had a distinctive style, with most of his photos featuring both genuine photographic realism and various effects. He excelled in traditional photographic techniques like bokeh, blur, panning, rule of thirds, and long exposure, often combining multiple effects in a single photo. Additionally, he was the sole practitioner of a unique effect named after him, Romano Abilità Artistica, loosely translating to Romano's artistry. While challenging to describe in words, my attempt would be that it renders some features super realistic, while adjacent ones appear fuzzy, with changes in color or shade within the same object. However, this description falls short of capturing its true essence. While much of the information about Piero was intellectually and artistically intriguing, 2 astonishing facts stood out. The person overseeing administration at his studio was his niece, Gina Romano Bianchi, a friend of Laura's whom I had met only once and never in Chicago, known to me by her married name, Gina Bianchi. Additionally, Piero had died in a car crash on September 1st of the preceding year, and his memorial service in Chicago, before his body was sent to his ancestral burial plot in Italy, took place on September 6th. The timing seemed highly coincidental, Laura becoming emotional around September 2nd, supposedly about becoming an empty nester, and her and the girls' shopping trip to Chicago from September 5th through 8th. Though not a rocket scientist, I hold a master's in chemistry from one of the top 10 schools in the country, allowing me to piece it together. Despite the crushing realization, the only plausible explanation was that Laura had been involved in a genuine love affair with Piero Romano for at least 10 years, and my daughters were aware of it. Another intriguing detail emerged: a Chicago exhibition of Piero's most famous and stimulating works, including those owned by private collectors and some never seen publicly before, was scheduled for April 16th, 18th, 3 weeks away from when I discovered this information. I was confident that Laura would have a business trip to Chicago around that time, despite the 18th being my birthday, and the exhibition likely featuring the photographs from the crate delivered to our house 2 weeks earlier. Update. I have never felt more driven in my life to devise a plan for addressing my unfaithful wife and disloyal daughters. Due to my initial rage, which I needed to suppress to execute my intentions, I had to arrange a business trip for the night I discovered the incriminating information and 2 nights thereafter. I left a heartfelt message on Laura's work phone, apologizing profusely and promising to make it up to you, before packing what I needed for a 3-night stay in a local hotel. Part 1 of my plan involved preparing all the necessary divorce papers to serve and file once I obtained the expected proof. Part 2 aimed to find a way to have someone visit and film the Chicago exhibition on its opening day, the 16th, which was by invitation only. Part 3 focused on organizing my affairs to secure as many material possessions and funds as possible. My sentiments toward Laura were indifferent, and I was very close to feeling the same about Grace and Angela. Part 4 was about ultimate revenge, even after the divorce's conclusion. Part 1 was no problem. I got a recommendation for a good divorce attorney, Gail Schiff. She advised me on everything I needed to do, and despite her recommendation for irreconcilable differences as grounds, she was willing to proceed with long-standing infidelity. Gail just needed a modicum of proof before she could file the papers, which I expected to have for her on the morning of the 17th. She could arrange for service on Laura by a law enforcement agent other than the county sheriff, along with a private process server to record events on the last night of the exhibition, on the 18th. For Part 2, I gathered as much information as I could about art appraisers with any relation to Chicago. I found a young appraiser named Roberto Milan trying to build his business. I went to see him in Chicago, talked with him for almost a full day. Roberto was familiar with Piero's work, certain he could get an invitation to the opening on the 16th, not averse to filming the photos I thought would interest me using a small, expensive, easily hidden HD camera I gave him. He conveyed his belief that he could provide a thorough and high appraisal of the photos I anticipated, his final words expressing the desire for a challenge to establish himself as a legitimate player in the art appraisal world convinced me to hire Roberto. For a segment of Parts 3 and 4, I cashed in 2 bearer bonds from our safe deposit box, totaling about $25,000. I couldn't remember if Laura knew about them, and she certainly wouldn't now. They were now worth together about $25,000. For another segment of Part 3, I provided my attorney with a complete list of all our assets, including an appraisal of our house. I took photographs of all Laura's jewelry and all contents of our safe deposit box, minus the bearer bonds, and provided my attorney with updated bank statements, credit card numbers, and outstanding purchases, retirement plans, and brokerage accounts. As a small segment of Part 4, on the last day of my supposed absence, I sneaked into the house. While Laura was at work, I took a magic marker and erased my face from every photograph in the dozen or so albums she had compiled over the years. Having never examined them in their entirety before, I was surprised to find that I appeared in no more than 15% of the photos. I also discovered 2 previously unseen photos that, even if I had come across them before, I would likely have considered innocent. They featured Laura, Gina, Grace, Angela, and notably, Piero. I made high-quality scans and photocopies of these photos before returning them to the album, marked with a black marker across them, an arrow pointing to Piero, and a legend declaring him the love of Laura's life. 2 days after my return from the business trip, Laura informed me that she had to go to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to the afternoon of the 19th. Expressing disappointment about not spending my birthday together, I suggested accompanying her, and she smoothly demurred, stating it was all business. She promised to take me to a resort the following weekend, asserting she would make it up to me in a way I hadn't ever experienced before. Following that statement with a kiss, at that point in time, I regarded her as a $3 fancy woman, so I just enjoyed myself. She gagged a little and obviously wasn't pleased, but pretended that she was, asserting it was only a sample of what's to come, darling. For all of parts 1, 3, and 4 of my plan, there was a particularly risky aspect. However, the rest, especially after getting comfortable with and hiring the art appraiser, I was quite confident would fall into place. The risky part involved talking to Grace. Deciding that I needed a face-to-face with her, as soon as I dropped Laura off at the airport on the morning of the 15th, I drove the approximately 180 miles from Columbus to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where Grace was studying chemical engineering. Why Grace and not Angela? While both girls took after their mother more than me, Grace was by far more like me, at least in terms of how her brain worked, than Angela. Neither Angela nor Laura could ever conceive of a course of study in chemical engineering, closely related to my degrees in chemistry. Also, Grace had a harder time lying than either Angela or Laura, and although her failure to advise me of Laura's love affair with Piero suggested otherwise, or maybe not, she seemed more concerned with a nuclear family than Angela was. I called ahead to Grace's cell phone when I was about halfway there, and she actually seemed excited to meet. I told her I'd take her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the eatery of her choosing, about a mile from campus, and got a secluded booth. After our meal, I informed Gracie that there was a very serious matter I needed to discuss with her, and she displayed a perplexed expression. Before continuing, I asked for her assurance not to disclose our conversation to anyone, including her mom and Angela, until the day after my birthday. I made a request for her promise, raising my hand in the I swear position. She seemed surprised and commented, "Wow, sounds serious." "Okay, Dad, I promise, I swear," she assured, lifting her hand and attempting to force a smile. I then revealed, "I learned about your mother's involvement with Piero Romano, and I'm contemplating the possibility of a divorce." "Oh no, Daddy," she exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welling up instantly. I continued, "There's only one hope. I need to gather all the information you have about it, and I need you to undergo a DNA test." "What?" she exclaimed, nearly on the verge of a meltdown. Observing that the restaurant wasn't the appropriate setting, I instructed her to meet me outside, and afterward, we'd head to my car once I settled the bill. I located the waitress, paid in cash with a $1.20 tip, and discovered Grace, still in tears on the sidewalk. Once in my car, I felt the need to get to the bottom of things. I told Grace that the survival of our family depended on her opening up. After a brief period of crying where she struggled to express herself, and with me merely gazing at her, she began to share. She revealed that she didn't realize Mom was involved with Piero, or Uncle Piero, as we were told to call him, until she was 12, despite displays of affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas. Grace became aware of this through remarks Angela made. Angela knew before she did, but Grace lacked the sophistication to understand. When she confronted Mom, Mom explained it as an adult matter. She explained that she was in love with 2 men, and insisted that I would understand when I grew up. Mom emphasized that I must never know about it, because it could mean the end of our family, as I was deemed too insensitive, that's the word she used, to comprehend such complexities. Consequently, I was sworn to secrecy. Grace broke down again for a while, and then continued to recount her experiences. She shared that she had hoped Piero's funeral would mark the end of it all, and that you would never find out. However, after Mom made a scene at Piero's casket, Grace confronted her once more. She told Mom that if she jumped into someone else's arms, she would reveal the entire story to me. Mom rebuked Grace, questioning how she could think of her as a tramp. Mom claimed to have loved Piero and me, asserting that there would be no one else. She simply needed to honor Piero's memory. Grace believed her, and prayed that the day when I found out would never come, confident that Mom would not engage in another love or even a closeness affair. Update. I gleaned additional details from her until I sensed it would be counterproductive to press further. She remained in anguish, just as I had anticipated, when I revealed the second purpose of my visit. I expressed my hope to reconcile with Grace's mother based on the information she had shared. However, I needed one more thing for clarity. I asked both of us to submit DNA samples to determine if she was my biological daughter. Grace cried, objecting, insisting that I was her only father. "I know that I'm your father," I reassured her, "but I have to know whether I'm your biological one too." Despite her protests, she eventually agreed. I presented her with the letter in the envelope addressed to the lab and sealed it. The instructions were to mail the results to both Grace directly and to me. As I drove her back to campus, she observed as I dropped the envelope into an express mail mailbox. When we hugged goodbye, she pleaded with me to forgive Mom and make it work. I explained that I couldn't promise that at the moment, as I don't lie like she does. However, I acknowledged that Grace had done her part to increase the chances that it would work. I reminded her not to tell anyone about our talk until the 19th at the earliest. She assured me with a smile, and then hesitated, mentioning one more thing. She explained that Mom and Angela would be attending a Chicago exhibition of Piero's works, some of which featured photographs of Mom, on my birthday. She conveyed Mom's apology for the unfortunate timing, but clarified that Mom had to attend as works inherited from Piero under his will would be displayed. Mom wanted Grace to join as well, but she had too much schoolwork. I smiled and casually responded, "I know, thanks for being honest." After another hug, she left. Unseen by her, I shed tears, realizing that my relationship with Angela was now as dead as the one with Laura. I hadn't yet decided if I could salvage it with Grace. Grace remained unaware that I had recorded our conversation in the car. There was one thing that Grace didn't know that would cause her pain and was a segment of part 4 of my plan. The swabs that I put into the envelope that was supposedly mine belonged to an Italian background janitor who worked in my office building, someone I had been friendly with over the years. I promised to pay to have his ancestry determined as a birthday present to him. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 swabs instead of 1 to do that. The one I did send in for testing his heritage showed that he was more than 80% Italian, with some Eastern and Western European small contributions, which made him happy. Why did I put an Italian's DNA in what was to be tested instead of mine? Because I wanted everyone to hurt. The reason I used an Italian is that during DNA testing, they can find out the heritage of both contributors, even if comparing 2 sets. And since Piero was Italian, I wanted everyone to conclude that he was the father of Grace, and if I could work it out, Angela. I crossed my fingers, hoping Grace wouldn't spill the beans. I spoke to her on the phone on the 16th and 18th, and she assured me she hadn't. And since I hadn't heard from Laura, I was sure that was true. Around 11 p.m. on the 16th, Roberto Milan emailed photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibit to me. They hurt me deeper than I thought they would. I shook like a leaf as I sobbed while viewing them. There was a series of 10 photos, increasing in size from the first to the last, all with distinctive Romano characteristics, including the last 2 brilliant Romano Abilità Artistica effects. The series was entitled Natale Amore, Christmas Love. What initially broke me out were the first 2 in the series, which showed 2 girls in the background of a photo of a woman who was unquestionably Laura. While there was blurring of the girls' faces, there was no doubt from their hair, what they were wearing, Christmas gifts from my mother, and relative sizes that it was Angela and Grace when they were around 9 and 11. In the second photo of the first 2, one of Laura's body was exposed, and she had what could only be described as a duck-me look. The next 3 in the series showed Laura in increasingly less dress, until in the final one she was, well, you can imagine. The second series started again with a photo where the girls were in the background, this time somewhat older, with the last 4 progressively risque until the second to last, which had Laura in an exceptionally suggestive pose, and the last one where the clear implication was that she had just been ducked and was in bliss. After I threw up, drank some ginger ale, and had a good cry, I looked at the photos again. If they didn't break my heart, I'd have to say that the last 2 photos were probably the best of their type I had ever seen. I read the text accompanying Roberto Milan's report. "Sorry, I know that this will be hard on you. The collection is worth a minimum of $300,000, more likely $500,000. The second to last photo alone would bring $125,000 to $175,000 if sold separately. The last two photos are the best execution of Romano Abilità Artistica effects in history, not just in my opinion, but in that of at least 4 other appraisers and art critics that I overheard talking about them. I asked Gina if any were for sale. She put me in touch with the owner per Piero's will, not surprisingly, Laura. Laura said they weren't for sale at the present time because they were priceless, and the 4 where she was completely en dot would not be sold until after her pass away. I wouldn't want the general public, and especially my husband, seeing me like that while I'm alive, she said. The especially my husband with a laugh. Update. I sent the digital recording of Grace's words, along with Roberto's photos and words, via email to my attorney, Gail Schiff. She contacted me at 7:30 on the morning of the 17th. I conveyed that my petition for divorce was clearly justified, citing infidelity. I informed her that a law enforcement officer would serve Laura the following night at the gala. I added, "There's one thing I need to add," and mentioned that I would drop it off so she could include it when expressing it to the process server along with the divorce papers. I handed an envelope, addressed to Angela, to Gail. It contained a letter from me, a swab from the Italian janitor's cheek, a container with a new swab, and an envelope with express mail postage addressed to a DNA lab, accompanied by instructions. The letter to Angela conveyed the message that if there was any hope for a future relationship between us, she needed to swab the inside of her cheek, place it in the envelope addressed to the DNA lab with my swab already in it, and send it via express mail. The lab had instructions to mail the results directly to her at school and to me. I emphasized that even if she didn't desire a future relationship, she still needed to comply. If she didn't, I made it clear that I would ensure our finances were tied up for years, leading her to say goodbye to tuition, room and board, and expenses for the end of her junior year and her senior year at the expensive private college she attended. I pointed out that even if her feelings towards me matched her past actions and inactions, it was in her self-interest to do as I asked. I mentioned that Grace had already complied. The letter was signed, "Your father, Grant Oster." I was glad that I wasn't there when the reality hit the fan in Chicago on my birthday. The process server reported to Gail that Laura and Angela were all smiles as they hobnobbed with the public at about 9 p.m. on the 18th. They were perplexed when they were handed the envelopes by the law enforcement officer as the process server with him took photos. They opened up the envelopes on the spot. The law enforcement officer left, but the process server stayed behind, taking more photos until he was kicked out. The photos he emailed to Gail, and Gail to me, showed Laura sinking lower and lower onto the ground, ultimately landing in a fetal position, and Angela first distraught, then angry, and then trying to tend to her prone mother. Angela called me the morning of the 19th. After expressing her disgust with the way I handled serving the papers, I responded strongly, using language I had never used with her before, expressing that it was tough, and she should tell it to someone who cares. Following this, she stated that she wasn't inclined to do the DNA test. In a sarcastic tone, I questioned whether she didn't want to find out who her biological father is, as opposed to the one who has been supporting her all these years. She replied, affirming that I am her father. In response, I expressed uncertainty, stating that maybe I am, maybe not. However, I emphasized that one thing is certain. I've already instructed my attorney to freeze all of her mother's and my accounts. I assured her that there would be no money for her education or living expenses since she's 20 years old in the future, unless she mails that envelope with her cheek swab. Now that I think of it, I mentioned to her that I would need a video of her swabbing her cheek, putting it in the envelope, and mailing it, all at the same time, in order to believe her. This was due to the lies she had told me over the years. I emphasized that I hadn't lied to her. She retorted, pointing out that I hadn't told the whole truth, as my sister would have her tuition paid. I expressed my displeasure, stating that she seemed to be as unpleasant as her mother, and I had no intention of wasting time discussing it further because it disgusted me. I gave her an ultimatum: either do as I say and email me the video, or this would be the last conversation we ever had in her life.
After that, I forcefully hung up the phone. It's satisfying to have a landline where slamming the phone down makes a statement, unlike a cell phone where pushing the red button provides no emphasis. The mother did not attempt to call me from the 18th to the 21st. She likely delayed her return to Columbus for 2 days, consoling herself with her close friend Gina. The excitement at the exhibition on the 18th made its way into 2 local Chicago papers, complete with a photo of Laura, seemingly provided by the process server. Amid the urge to expel my stomach contents, I found some amusement. It was apparent that Laura had visited the house, which I no longer considered a home, on the 22nd. I deduced this as the envelope I had left on the new front door, reinforced with steel and a changed lock, similar to the side and rear doors, had vanished. My attorney's message on my cell phone indicated the need for a discussion. The envelope was addressed to Vile Ducking Slot, an assumption I believed Laura would recognize. My brief message inside conveyed, "Hey, contact your attorney regarding the retrieval of your personal belongings. The sooner we sell the house and conclude our sham of a marriage, the better. I'll resist any attempt by you to return to this house until it is sold. Consider doing something decent for once in our farcical relationship, and don't resist it. Even though economic reasons seem to be your sole motivation, given your lack of love or respect for me. Your formerly clueless ex, Grant. P.S. The doors are booby-trapped. Any unauthorized entry will start all of your previous family albums on fire." It required a court appearance by the attorneys for something to be worked out with respect to living arrangements. I probably could have gotten exactly what I wanted if I didn't put that P.S. on the note to the slot, but I couldn't help myself. We finally, through our attorneys, agreed to both vacate the house and immediately put it on the market, with the amount of our temporary housing expenses considered in the division of assets. Laura tried to be difficult in the monetary negotiations, but she had no bargaining power because she acquired her precious photographs from Piero while we were still married. When I demanded 5 photographs, she could choose 1, then me, etc., until all 10 were divvied up. According to her attorney, she got hysterical, especially since by that time she had seen how I had doctored the family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we took Roberto's appraisal of the photographs, one done by an appraiser hired by her, and one by a neutral appraiser. Hilariously, Roberto's was the lowest one, costing her $200,000 more than if she had accepted his appraisal. Since this was seriously cutting into what she would end up with, she offered me 2 of the photographs that she chose. However, she rescinded that offer when I had my attorney tell hers that I agreed as long as she had them delivered to the local firing range and she watched what I did to them. When all was said and done, by the time the divorce proceedings had concluded, Laura was left with her personal possessions, half the furniture, and 1/4 of the sale price of the house, nothing else, including no alimony, but a suspended jail sentence. More about that later. We did agree to jointly pay all of the college expenses of Grace and Angela until they graduated, but nothing more than that. As for Angela and Grace, as expected, the DNA results came back that they were not my biological daughters. That infuriated Laura so much that she almost had a stroke. I talked to Grace about it, not Angela, who had complied with my request solely to get her college expenses paid, and apparently was happy with no future relationship with me. My daughter conveyed that her mother claimed the DNA test results were incorrect. According to her, Mom asserted that during her marriage to me, she never had any close relations with anyone other than me and Piero. Additionally, she insisted that she never even met Piero before our daughter was born. I responded by questioning why, if that were the case, our daughter's father had Italian ancestry like Piero, while my family lineage is entirely Dutch on both sides. I expressed my skepticism, highlighting that her mother has proven to be a pathological liar throughout our more than 24-year relationship, deceiving me about her love for me. Despite all this, she mentioned that her mother desired another DNA test. I explained to my children that the DNA test wasn't going to happen since they were not minors, and it was unrelated to the divorce. I clarified that I merely wanted to know the truth in my mind, and I wanted both of them to be aware of it. I reminded them that they witnessed me swabbing my cheek, putting the swab in the envelope, and then mailing it.
In response to my daughter's request, I mentioned that her mother's desire for a face-to-face conversation wasn't something I would entertain. I informed them that I instructed my attorney to ignore her repeated requests. I questioned why I would have any reason to engage in a conversation with her, My daughter pleaded with me not to use derogatory terms for her mother and expressed her continued love for her despite her faults. She asked me, as a favor, to talk with her for an hour. I conveyed to Grace that I couldn't comply with her request. While I had forgiven her and desired to maintain a relationship with her, I made it clear that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would lead me to engage in a conversation with her mother. Update. Now for Laura's suspended jail sentence and getting only 1/4 of the proceeds of the sale of the house. After my phone conversation with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's desire for a talk with me, she did something stupid. I thought that she might pull something, so I hooked up and walked around with a panic button connected directly to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the condo that I was renting during the divorce proceedings until the final financial details were worked out. I didn't see the two big guys and Laura standing out to the side when I looked through the peephole. As soon as I opened the door, the two big guys burst in and grabbed me, but not before I pushed my silent panic button. After being forcefully seized, they pulled me to a chair and secured me to it while Laura came in and the other woman departed. Laura expressed regret for resorting to such measures, attributing it to my refusal to meet with her and redo the DNA test, which she insisted was incorrect. Following this, she initiated a conversation with some upbeat remarks, claiming she always loved me and asserting that her affection extended to Piero as well. She contended that her heart was expansive enough to encompass love for both of us. She realized that we were past the point of reconciliation, but just wanted to get things off her chest. As she was talking to me, she was holding a swab up. Obviously, she was going to force a DNA sample from me. It really irritated her that I made no verbal response whatsoever to anything that she said. I refused to even acknowledge her presence, trying my best to avoid all eye contact. Fortunately, as she was about to have her two goons pry my mouth open for a DNA swab, there was a response to my panic button. The security company had called the police, and 3 cops, with weapons drawn, barged into the house. They found me tied up, and one of the miscreants had illegal items in his pants pocket. I explained the situation. The cops ignored Laura's plea to simply let them go. They meant no damage, and they arrested the 3 of them. The little kidnapping event didn't play well with the judge in our divorce proceedings. After she let it be known that if she had to rule it would be really bad for Laura, I got the division of assets and other considerations set forth above. The criminal court took pity on Laura since it was her first offense. She got a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10,000 fine, which was from her share alone of the marital assets. The 2 guys didn't fare as well because they had shady histories. One got a year in prison before parole was possible, and the one with the illegal items got 5 years before parole was possible. Part 4 of my plan did not end when the divorce was final, although I will not admit here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. Just karma is what I always respond when asked about it. 18 months after the divorce was final, I was on a cruise of the Caribbean with a 32-year-old hot little divorcee who loved to be treated right and richly. She looked too much like Laura at that age and was too hot for me to look for a permanent relationship with her, but she was fun to be with, even though she wore me out dating. While I was dating on the cruise, Laura's apartment was broken into while she was at work. The place was trashed. Some items were stolen during a break-in, including the second most provocative and valuable Romano photo of Laura. More items were destroyed than stolen, however, including 7 of the other 8 remaining Romano photos and all of the family photo albums. Upon my return, I became a suspect. While it was impossible for me to have committed the crime myself, since I was on a boat 2,000 miles away, Laura insisted to the cops that I paid someone to carry it out. As soon as the cops approached me and hinted that I was a suspect, I refused to talk to them and sought legal representation. After scrutinizing my phone and financial records, which naturally excluded the 2 cashed-out bearer bonds that were never part of the divorce estate, they found no evidence that I could have paid anyone for the act. Furthermore, there was no association found with anyone capable of committing such deeds. 6 months after their initial contact with me, it seemed that the cops practically gave up, even though I am sure that Laura continued to pester them. Once the statute of limitations expired, I threw a party, my "It's All Finally Over" celebration, attended mostly by friends. My parents were no longer alive, but my brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, my new love interest. Melody, Melody's 2 adult children, and Grace, her husband, and my granddaughter were present. I have had no relationship with Angela, was not invited to her wedding, and wouldn't have attended even if invited. I learned from Grace that Angela's husband caught her cheating, and she is in the early stages of divorce proceedings. Laura gave Grace an ultimatum, either sever all ties with me or with her. To everyone's surprise, including mine, Grace chose me, likely because she was convinced that Laura was, as I had represented, a pathological liar. More importantly, Grace recognized the negativity of her mother, throwing her relationship with her paramour in her daughter's face and having them lie to cover up her cheating. Grace didn't want her children exposed to that attitude. Only one thing has caused friction between Grace and me in the last 5 years. I disclosed the truth about the DNA testing. She was initially upset with me but forgave me. Just as I forgave her for her duplicity over the years, she was actually very pleased that I was her biological father, and I had another DNA test done to provide additional confirmation.